Welcome back to the Algarve. Now, one of my channel's most successful videos is this 6-month owner's review of the 2019 Honda CB500X I posted a couple of years ago. At the time of making the video you're watching now, July 2021, it's had around 340,000 views, which by my standards is pretty good going. And I've had comments and questions from around the world about what is, after all, a very global, go-anywhere type of bike. So I thought it would be interesting to do an update 2 years on, particularly as Honda have tweaked the bike for 2021. Do I regret selling mine? Is this a worthy update? Let's find out. Now, getting a hold of a test bike at the moment isn't very easy though. What with the component shortage, production problems, COVID restrictions, and long lead times on just about everything that actually has to be assembled. The local Honda dealers couldn't help me, so my friends at Soulful Motorcycle Rentals offered to help out. They said I could borrow this 2021 CB500X for a few hours, gave me some suggested routes in the hills north of Faro, and left me to it. They also do guided tours and even provide riding equipment if you're down here on holiday. But as I live in the Algarve, of course, I was happy just to be left to my own devices and give the bike a good test run. It certainly looked and felt very familiar as I approached it. Apart from the splash of red paint on the rear subframe, I couldn't tell any difference from my 2019. I was looking forward to trying out the new, supposedly higher contrast instruments, but as soon as I switched the ignition on, I could see that sadly these were just as difficult to read as the originals. I don't get it. My Triumph Trident's simple yet extremely legible clock is proof that we now have the technology to make affordable, functional instrument clusters. So why do Honda, and it has to be said many other manufacturers, especially Japanese, continue to give us such poor screens? While I was riding, I think I only ever looked at the speed and occasionally the gear indicator, because the rest of the information is nigh on invisible, either because of the low contrast LCD screen or because it's just too small to see at a glance. So what's the new bike like compared to my 2019? Has the update been worthwhile? Well, doing my research properly, of course, I watched the video I made 2 years ago and scribbled down the top 5 things and top 5 gripes that I'd noted at the time. So let's go through those. First, the good points. The comfort hasn't changed. The CBX is still as user-friendly as ever, and the seat comfort and suspension are still among the best I've tried. Of course, the soft suspension can get a bit wallowy, especially on very fast roads like motorways, and there's still the very pronounced fork dive under heavy braking, but the trade-off is one of the plushest rides around. The riding position is also very good, and not surprisingly, this hasn't changed either. Nice and upright, you can envisage long rides, no problem. The overall size of the bike was something that I also appreciated a couple of years ago. It just feels right for me at 6'1" or 1'87 m, but I do still find it a bit top heavy. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's unmanageable, but I am quite tall, so this may be worth considering if you're a shorter rider. As I mentioned 2 years ago, I did actually drop my 2019 twice when doing some low speed maneuvering, something I've never done before or since with other bikes. As an aside, I often hear shorter riders complain that bikes nowadays are too big for them and that it's hard to get both feet comfortably on the ground. I totally get that, but it's sometimes not much fun being tall either. While it's obviously easier for me to get my feet down, I need a tall bike to feel at ease on, and these bring their own annoyances like high centers of gravity and just generally a heavier bike to push around, neither of which you really want. The GS, for example, is about the right size for me when I'm riding, but it's a big old bird when it comes to filtering, picking up after a drop, or moving around the garage. Number 3 on my list of things that I liked about my bike 2 years ago, running costs. These are still low, and the Euro 5 modifications don't seem to have hit fuel mileage at all. If anything, I managed even greater frugality on this run out on the 2021, averaging 3 litres per 100 kilometres, which is 95 mpg UK, 80 mpg US, as opposed to the 3.1, 90 miles per gallon UK, 75 US, I got over 6 months on my 2019. The difference is not statistically significant though. The bike is relatively cheap to buy, coming in at around €7,000, and insurance is going to be similarly affordable. I seem to recall I was paying around €150 a year, fully comprehensive. Number 4, I noted how much I liked the exhaust note and the little pops on overrun on my 2019. Sadly, this does seem to have fallen victim to Euro 5 regulations, because any pops I managed to generate on this 2021 were barely audible. Pity, because they were a nice feature of the bike, even though I'm generally not a fan of loud exhausts. The last thing I listed on my top 5 things that I liked about the 2019 was the general fit and finish. While it's not quite on a par with the likes of Triumph, the overall quality is excellent, especially given the price point. There are 1 or 2 bits of scratchy plastic, but the BMW F900XR that I had last year, for example, was no better, despite costing twice as much as the Honda and coming from a so-called premium brand. Finally, I like the fact that the CB500X sort of looks how you would imagine a smallish adventure bike to look. It's a very harmonious design, although I'm not a fan of the graphics on the tank. I think they're supposed to be some kind of stylized camouflage, but they look like a piece of giraffe to me. Fortunately, Honda hasn't clear coated over them, so at a pinch you could take them off. The most easily identifiable cosmetic change is the red subframe on the 2021, and this sits well with the white bike, but is barely noticeable with this black or red paint scheme. Now, before I get on to discussing whether Honda have improved on the things that annoyed me with my bike 2 years ago, just a quick word about how Soulful Bikes operate. Based in Faro in the Algarve, close to the airport, they offer a broad range of two-wheel vehicles that you can rent for pretty much as long as you want, ranging from electrically assisted pedal cycles to Harleys and even a Mash with a sidecar. But what appeals to me most is the way the route comes as part of the rental package. They send a PDF guide to your phone, which you can then click to go straight to Google Maps. This tells you the preferred route and what to look out for as you're riding. They even provided me, as you can see, with a RAM mounts phone cradle, although unfortunately this particular CB500X didn't come with Honda's optional USB charger, which I think is a bit of an oversight, especially as they're only about €40 from the dealer and are extremely useful for tours longer than a couple of hours. I had one on my 2019 and used it a lot. I did point this out to them when I returned the bike, and they said they would ask their supplying dealer to fit one. Soulful do offer, of course, fully guided tours, but apparently most customers choose the suggested route option, which is what I'm doing here. And I get that you have the freedom to do what you want while knowing that you're following pretty much the best route possible. And nice stop-off points for cold drinks and a bite to eat are also suggested. It certainly worked for me, and they are very kindly offering a discount on all bookings made via this channel. So if you enter the code RocketMan, you'll get a 5% discount off your next booking. So on to the things I said I hoped Honda would improve with a Mark II. Well, my 2 biggest gripes, the lack of power and the vibration above 5,000 revs per minute, have sadly not really been addressed. The lack of power was obviously not going to change because many buyers, at least in Europe, choose the CB500X precisely because it is A2 license compliant. Now, for those of you outside Europe, this basically means that you're limited to riding a bike with a maximum of 35 kilowatts or 48 horsepower for the first 2 years after passing your motorcycle test. So clearly Honda aren't going to be changing that anytime soon. Now, without fail, every time I say that 48 horsepower isn't enough on a motorbike, I always get irate comments from viewers who insist that it is, and to a certain extent I can see where they're coming from. But my acid test, as I've said before, is whether or how often you find yourself applying full throttle. Because if you do use full throttle on a bike or in a car, then almost by definition you need more power. 48 horsepower is enough in many riding situations, but I personally feel more comfortable knowing that I have at least 100 horsepower to play with should I feel the need or the urge. The second thing I complained about on my original 2019 video was the illegible clock. I touched on this earlier, but hoped things would improve as I became more used to the bike again. Honda said they had improved the contrast for the 2021, but in all honesty, I couldn't see any difference. Much of the information is displayed in tiny, hard to decipher characters, and the contrast from the LCD screen is very poor, meaning it's hard to read in strong sunlight, of which there is a lot here in Portugal. And what about my other major bugbear, the vibration? Well, despite Honda's claiming that they have addressed the problem by using more elaborate rubber engine mounts for the 2021, it seems just as bad as it did on my 2019. Now, I know that all motorbikes vibrate to a greater or lesser extent, but the CB500X becomes annoyingly buzzy at engine speeds above about 5,500–6,000 revs, and you feel the vibrations everywhere, hands, feet, and through the seat. So in my humble opinion, a long-distance, high-speed cruiser, this is not. Wind protection isn't that great either, although as an above-average height rider, I usually find this on many bikes. Told you being tall isn't all it's cracked up to be. The screen height is adjustable, but only using a tool, and it's a bit of a fiddly job, so not one that you'll be tackling very often. The final negative I made about the old bike was the poor fueling around town. You needed some pretty deft throttle control in traffic to avoid jerkiness, and I'm happy to report that Honda have addressed this, presumably as part of the Euro 5 updates. Whether it was deliberate or merely a side effect of the other tweaks to the engine, we'll never know, but the throttle is now noticeably smoother at lower speeds on the new model compared to the previous generation. Well done, Honda. So I suppose the question is, should you upgrade to the 2021 if you have one of the earlier models? My opinion is that you needn't bother, because the changes are so minor that you won't really notice much of a difference. Yes, the fueling is better, and that is a good, solid improvement, but the vibrations are still there, the single disc brakes are only just adequate, the instruments are still difficult to read, and of course there's no power hike. The CB500X looks like the sort of bike you'd be happy to travel long distances on, but really it isn't. 48 horsepower isn't enough, and even if it were, the vibrations at higher speeds will get you. The problem is, at the moment there's a gaping hole in Honda's lineup, and if you want a CB500X only with a bit more power, better suspension and beefier brakes, you have to step right up to the Africa Twin, which is a great bike, but it costs 2.5 times as much and is crammed with electronics that I think few people actually need, much less want to pay for. Do I regret selling my 500X? Well, in all honesty, I did a little until I got back on this bike, when the reasons I sold mine 18 months ago all came flooding back to me. The flaws are still there, and despite the bike's many qualities, fit and finish, reliability, price, riding position, seat comfort, it just isn't enough of a bike for the sort of riding I do. If I wanted an off-road bike, I'd probably go for the admittedly pricier Tenere 700, which wasn't available back in 2019, or for a more road-focused machine. I would look to see if I could make the relatively modest financial stretch to, say, a Yamaha Tracer 7, which has a much better engine, or the similarly priced and sportier MT-07 or Triumph Trident. All these are different to and more expensive than the CB, of course, but I think they're less compromised, offer better value for money, and are ultimately more enjoyable. That said, for the sort of light, laid-back touring I've been doing in this video, the Honda is perfectly adequate. But I think therein lies the problem for me. It's adequate, but by no means exhilarating, and for many bikers, myself included, that's an essential part of the deal. Sorry Honda, but the mods you made for the 2021 model year just weren't enough of an update to entice me back. But that's just my personal opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll do my best to answer. Don't forget to check out Soulful Bikes Rental next time you're down in the Algarve, and feel free to use my discount code that I've put in the description. As always, thanks for watching.